Okay, we're going to begin the first Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai. Moshe received the Torah at Sinai, Umasora Yeshua, and he transmitted it to Yeshua. What does it mean he transmitted it? Firstly, what did Moshe receive at Sinai? He received, firstly, the written law, and he received the oral law. What is the oral law? The oral law is God's interpretation of the written law, except it was never committed to writing. The written law is what we call the 5 books of Moses. The letters which are contained on the Torah scroll, that's the written law. God's interpretation of those words, what they mean, that's the oral law. You know, we have 6 sections to the Talmud. We talk about thousands of folios of Gemara. We have Mishnah. All that, the Gemara is an elucidation on the Mishnah. The Mishnah is the most concise work of the oral law. It was committed to writing by Judah the Prince. Except, unless you understand what is stated there, for all intents and purposes, they're just highlights at best. You need the endless pages of the Talmud and the discussions by the rabbis of the Talmud to elucidate and to give you an understanding how all that's sourced and what it means. And therefore, the Gemara tells us, the Talmud tells us, that a person who is proficient in Mishnah but did not study Gemara, these people are destroyers of the world. Because if your knowledge is only based on the Mishnah and you don't have the elucidation of the Talmud to elucidate what it states there, you really have no understanding what it stated whatsoever. Therefore, the Gemara tells us a person who rules from the Mishnah and he doesn't know the Gemara, he's a destroyer of the world. He will destroy Judaism. Because it's an incorrect understanding. So you have to be proficient not only in the Mishnah, which is the source material of the written law, of the oral law, but the Gemara, which is an elucidation of the oral law. There's the famous 2 sects of Jews during the Second Temple period. There were the Sadducees and there were the Pharisees. The Pharisees, they were known as the Prushim. The word Porush in Hebrew means separation. They separated themselves from anything which was impure, even though they would eat ordinary food, but even the ordinary food, they would only be involved in something which was on a spiritually pure level. Anything was contaminated, they would not be associated with it. They maintained the standard which was above reproach. The Sadducees, the Sadducees, they rejected the origin of the oral law. They said the oral law was comprised and concocted. I'm using the word concocted, which has a certain pejorative connotation, by the rabbis. The rabbis came to hoodwink all of us. And they say it's God's word, but it's not God's word. And every word of the Torah, of the written law, is open to any interpretation as long as the interpretation fits. So the classical example of this was, it says in the Torah, you should not put a stumbling block before a blind man. So what do the words mean? If a person doesn't see, he's walking down the street, don't put a stumbling block, he should trip and fall. They said that's what it means. However, the oral law, which was given at Sinai, Moshe being God's spokesman said, no, it means a lot more than that. It means don't mislead a person. An example, you go to a person and says, I want to give you good advice. Sell your property and take the cash and invest it in something else. But the person, when he gives the person this advice, he knows he's misleading him because he wants to go and he wants to purchase the property, or he wants a third party to purchase the property. So he's giving him bad advice, but the person who's giving the advice, he believes he's getting the best advice in the world. He's a violation of do not put a stumbling block before a blind man. If a man, something's not permitted to you, such as a Nazarite, he's not permitted to drink wine, and he doesn't have wine available to him, and you offer him wine, you're putting a stumbling block. You're putting him in a setting which you're enticing him. You don't know, he may cross that line. A blind man doesn't see at all. But let's say he has a macular degeneration, he doesn't see well, and you lead him on a path where he can't see the cracks on the ground or the roots on it. He's going to trip. You're bringing this person into a setting where he may be enticed and he may actually violate his Nazaritehood by drinking wine or other areas, which he's not permitted to cross lines. The one who creates that setting, the scenario where the person may fail, he's in violation of do not put a stumbling block before a blind man, because he has certain vulnerabilities. You know, there's an expression, it's like taking candy from a baby. You know, some people are so vulnerable, any slight little movement causes him to fall. And if that's that person's predicament, you have no right to do it. Another example, the Torah tells us, Lo savaru eish b'chol mosher seichem. You're not permitted to kindle fire in your communities on Shabbos. What does that mean? So what it means, according to the oral interpretation, you're not permitted to kindle fire on Shabbos. You're not permitted, whether it's to illuminate your house, whether it's to cook food, whether it's any area, but the permission is kindling. But let's say you had kindled fire from before Shabbos, and your home is being illuminated from that fire, or being warmed by that fire. There's no provision. The provision is to kindle the fire, but if the fire was kindled from before Shabbos, it's not a problem. The Sadducees know when it says you should not kindle fire, you should not have fire in your communities, you're not permitted to benefit from fire on Shabbos, even if the fire was kindled before Shabbos. Therefore, they would sit in the dark, they would sit in the cold house, they would eat cold food. Because if the food itself was on the fire, although the fire was created before the Shabbos, you're not permitted to have fire, therefore they would eat cold food. There's a custom among Jews, Ashkenazic and Sephardic Jews, we eat on Shabbos, it's called cholent. What is cholent? Cholent, we have the Ashkenazic version of cholent, and the Sephardim have their type of cholent. But everybody agrees, in Hebrew it's called chamin. During the day, you have to eat hot food. Why do you have to eat hot food? To show that we conduct ourselves not as the Sadducees, because they did not have hot food on Shabbos. Even if you have hot food Friday night, but that's hot from before Shabbos. But to leave food on the fire on Shabbos from before Shabbos, that didn't exist. So by the time daytime came, in the Sadducees communities, all the food was cold. We have hot food on the fire, on the stove, and we take that hot food, we eat it on Shabbos. To show that the interpretation of kindling fire doesn't mean as they say, but rather means to actually create the fire, not to benefit from the fire. That's why there's a custom among Ashkenazim, there's even a mitzvah, to eat hot food, what we call cholent, or they call it chamin, the Sephardic means hot food, for that reason, on Shabbos. Moshe Kibbutz Torah b'Sinai. What did he receive? He received the Torah in the depth, the breadth, the written, the oral, the revealed Torah, the concealed Torah. Every aspect of Torah, God communicated to Moshe Rabbeinu. Did he communicate everything to Yoshua? Whatever Moshe knew, did Yoshua know? Basically, yes, but maybe not necessarily everything. Because the Torah itself is infinite. Because it's God's wisdom, it's unlimited. Therefore, one human being doesn't have the capacity to comprehend all that's contained within the Torah. But even if whatever you could comprehend, everybody has a different capacity. So Moshe Rabbeinu, even if he commuted to Yoshua, whatever the written law and the oral laws, but the depths, the various depths, based on Moshe's capacity, he may have had a capacity, he understood things that Yeshua did not have a capacity to understand. But in the actuality, whatever the written law is, whatever the revealed law, the revealed is, whatever it is, the concealed, that was communicated. The levels, the depths of understanding, that's a different story. That's based on your capacity. But if you have the capacity, then you come upon that. I'll give you an example. You take two flints, like Motzoi Shabbos, Saturday night, Hora Havdalah services, that we say a bracha on the fire. We say Bar Gofen on the wine. We say Bar B'Samim. We smell the spices, and we say Bar Reish. God created the different lights of the fire. Why do we say Bar Reish Saturday night as part of the Havdalah service? Because when God created Adam, and after Adam had eaten of the tree of knowledge, he was driven from the Garden of Eden. And Adam never experienced a nighttime. And God said to Adam, the day that you will eat of the tree of knowledge, you will die. So he believed he would die, not that he's going to be subject to death. So we know that as the night goes on, because the sun goes further below the horizon, it gets darker and darker. And the darkest part of the night is the end of the night, before the sun rises, before dawn. Adam believed when he saw the night coming and becoming more intense, that was an indication life will start ebbing from him. That means death, because he never experienced night before. So he equated night, darkness, with death. All of a sudden, what happens? Dawn comes, sunrise. He realizes night is not death. He's going to live, but in a time that there's no light. So what do? You got to illuminate the darkness. How do you illuminate the darkness? Came Motzoi Shabbos Saturday night, because God gave him wisdom. He took two flints, rubbed them together, and he created fire. So the first fire, human fire that existed in existence, was created Saturday night by Adam when he rubbed the two flints together. Therefore, to commemorate that moment of creation of fire during the Havdalah service, we say Bar Reish, because when did he create that fire? Saturday night, after Shabbos was over. So we have the fire, we say Bar Reish on that fire. Let's say you have two flints, and you never went to Outback camp, survival camp, right? Some people, they go away for 6 weeks, and they sleep in trees and hang from trees, and whatever it is, that's what they do, and they pay a fortune for this. Outback, survival. They never went, and now the person needs matches. Doesn't have matches to light the campfire. He doesn't have it. So, but he heard that there's flints. If you take two flints, but he doesn't know what a flint is. He doesn't know what to rub. He doesn't know, but he has instructions exactly how to do it. Except the man's illiterate. And has all the instructions, everything. But if you know how to read, then you know exactly what to do, how to identify what flints are, and how to rub it together to create fire. But if you don't have the ability to read, because you're illiterate, you can have everything there, but it's a closed book. You're totally in the dark. You're going to remain in the dark because you don't know how to create this fire. You have the Torah, L'Havdil. It contains everything. If you have the oral interpretation, which is God's interpretation, you open vistas which border on the infinite. It activates energies which border on the infinite. A level of blessing and positiveness which borders on the infinite. But you have to understand exactly what the words mean. You have to know how to read the text. But if you're an ignoramus, and I say ignoramus, well, I went to Ulpan for 3 years, and I had the best Ulpan teacher. And Ulpan was given in 92nd Street Y, And I pay, and I'm one of the underwriters of 92nd Street Y. So I got a private class. You understand? You have as much relevance to the Torah to understand what the Torah is saying as Bob's dog. Because unless you know the oral law, it means nothing. At best, you have a story. It's a narrative, a story. But what's the halachic significance? Unless you know what God meant, you don't know. Don't know. Many years ago, when I started to teach, Baruch Hashem, I was fortunate. I had very special students. What I mean special students means it's not my assessment. They had impeccable credentials in terms of education. Harvard, Wharton, Stanford, and they already were leaders in their areas where they were. And they started studying the Gemara. And one of them says to me, Rabbi, it doesn't make any sense. Based on his background, he has a PhD in statistics, and he has a this and that, MBA in business, whatever you have. Rabbi, it doesn't make sense. I said, it makes sense. You don't understand. There'll come a time you'll understand. Once you'll understand, then everything will make sense. Same idea. But you have to have the code words. You have to have an orientation. You have to understand certain formulas and fundamentals. When you understand those fundamentals, the formulas, and you understand where it's coming from, then all of a sudden, I see, said the blind man, all of a sudden everything's illuminated. His capacity. Who was Moshe Rabbeinu? What was the capacity of his soul? Moshe's soul was the equivalent of all the souls of the Jews combined. That was the dimension of his soul. So if you have a soul of that capacity, the equivalent of the whole Jewish people combined, what is your spiritual capacity? What's your grasp? It's not to be understood. So when Moshe communicated to Yeshua, whatever he communicated everything. But the various depths of understanding which he had, you may have come upon them because I've given you enough information and fundamentals that if you delve in it, based on your own capacity, you're going to come upon it. You will come upon it. It's like Moshe, even what he received from Hashem, did he receive even the deepest level of understanding? The answer is no, it's infinite. The understanding of Torah is infinite. Moshe not being infinite, he can't come upon the infinite, but he comes upon much because of his own capacity, which borders on the infinite. So Yeshua, which was not exactly his Rebbe, although he was dedicated to it, he did not make a move without him and was never distracted, but still, your capacity is different capacity, much less capacity. As a result of that, you have everything intact and you communicate it and you're qualified to transmit it. But what lies in it, to cull everything that lies in that, you don't have that capacity. Does Moshe Kibbutz Torah Sinai? Just as Moshe, when he received Torah from Sinai, from God, there are areas of depth which even Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't come upon it because it's the infinite. Identically, Yeshua, who was not Moshe Rabbeinu, he came upon areas within his own capacity. But Moshe Rabbeinu had a greater capacity. The Gemara tells us in Tractate Bava Basra, Pnei Moshe K'Pnei Chama. The face of Moshe was the equivalent of the sun. Pnei Yeshua K'Pnei Levana. The face of Joshua was like the face of the moon. As great as Joshua was, just as the moon only reflects the light of the sun, but the sun generates its own light, identically, the difference between Moshe and Yeshua was a recipient. He did not generate his own, comparatively speaking. Moshe was the source. He's the source in terms of within mankind, within the mortal. He's the source. He's beaming it out. Yeshua has a phenomenal mirror image. He mirrors that light, but that light is given off not from the origin. There's a reflection of that light. That was Yeshua compared to his Rebbe, Moshe Rabbeinu.